Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's Eric Coffin. I'm here at the inaugural Mineral Investors Forum in Toronto, the day before the 2018 PDAC. I'm here with Dave Broughton from Aston Bay, and I wanted Dave in particular from Aston Bay to have a bit of a conversation with us because really this year, I think this year's program is all about a shot at a major discovery, and Dave happens to have a particularly large amount of experience with this model and this type, and frankly it was Dave that convinced me to sort of get behind the story by walking me through the model, and this is why it makes sense, and yeah, there is really a shot on this project. I mean, can you give us a thumbnail of what's the geological model that you're going after here? What kind of potential are you looking at?
Well, it's a model that really comes right out of all the work that I was able to do in the Copper Belt with obviously a lot of other really good people, and we were successful, and it's driven by sort of a fundamental understanding of what goes on in sedimentary basins from a structural point of view, fluid flow, where the traps are, different styles of mineralization in different sorts of settings. All of that happens in the Copper Belt, and I think there are indications that the same sorts of things are going on here in northern Canada. And some of that is because there's already a world-class zinc deposit in the district, the Polaris, that was, you put it up against almost any other zinc deposit in the world, and it stands up. Right. And to me, the district really had been forgotten from a zinc perspective, certainly, yeah. And from a copper perspective as well. It was never a focus in the early days, because it was, Cameco was looking for zinc, and copper was sort of this oddity, right. And certainly in the last 20 years, since they were active, there's been a whole lot of work done to better understand the way these systems really work, and a lot of it in the Copper Belt, where I happen to be part of it. Yeah. So yeah, it's just, to me, there's a lot that you can bring in.
Just for the record, Dave's being modest as he usually is. Dave is co-credited with the discovery of a couple of the world's largest copper deposits in the Copper Belt, and that's something that's important to this story because you look at the location, like it's pretty far north. I mean, it's on tidewater, which is great, but I mean, in that kind of location, you want scale. But that's the beauty of this model, is that these are very large-scale targets. I mean, this class of deposits tends to be quite large.
Well, they also tend to be very high grade, and and yes, it's a district that's well in the north of Canada, but Polaris and Nanisivik operated up there very successfully for 20 years because both those deposits had the grade, as well as being on tidewater, and they operated quite a long time ago. Now in Nunavut, you don't have a lot of the issues that you have in other jurisdictions, certainly not like you do in Africa. Yeah. So, but grade is really it, and these stratiform copper deposits, I mean, the reason that people are exploring for them is because, you're not looking at 0.5% in a porphyry, yeah. You're looking at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6%, and that pays for a lot of, other things. And so the chance to discover a high-grade deposit in a favorable jurisdiction, close to tidewater and everything is that's pretty special.
Now you flew a very large gravity survey late last year, and I know you and Tom have been going through the processing, and I know reprocessing something that big takes a while, but can we expect to see some targeting news from you guys in the next 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks?
Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, I just came back from the Copper Belt. I spent the last 4 weeks over there, and on the plane on the way back, I've been working on the zinc story, which I think is people are going to find to be really compelling.
And so, I understand from Tom that you flew a gravity survey, mm-hmm. and gravity was the basis for discovery for Polaris?
It was.
So they basically Cameco drilled the gravity anomaly.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting story. There were some surface prospects that didn't have any legs, right. And so those were obviously tested right away, and that might have been the end of the story, but they did a ground gravity survey and discovered an anomaly down dip to the north that was blind. The deposit was blind, and so there was very little really surface leakage or anything like that in that particular environment. And you know, a couple of 100 meters down, 20 million ton high-grade zinc deposit. So when we look at both the copper and the zinc story that we've got, I mean, we have an outcropping zinc deposit, about 1 million tons of good grade of over 10%. It's open, but there are also other things around that lead me to believe that you know, there's unfinished business there on that side. And Storm sits on a sedimentary graben, and pretty much all the mineralization is either right in the faults that are controlling that graben, or in what looks like a fairly really sort of unfavorable, if you will, horizon that's coming out laterally. It's a secondary permeability from brecciation and faulting. Right. So not a classic sort of reservoir impregnated with hydrocarbons, that sort of thing. You know, a really good stratiform target, and yet there's a lot of high-grade mineralization that's developed in this, you know, sort of not very favorable setting. Right. So, you know, if there's a favorable setting below that these faults are also plumbing, right, you know, because the fluids are moving regionally through the whole basin, we know that. We know that Polaris and Storm have the same age. Right. So this is a regional major fluid event driving mineralization. And we know that these faults are the plumbing system. You know, it's like, well, what's underneath? Right. If there's a favorable stratiform target down there, that's a really compelling target. And Seal actually sits stratigraphically below Storm. Okay. You know, out on the coast. Right. So
the pieces fall into place.
The pieces fall into place. You know, so we've got this regional plumbing system with the you know, the fluid flow is already very apparent, and you know, and then because the rocks are all flat, you know, anything under your feet is blind. Yeah. So the gravity is an obvious way to target large massive sulfide mineralization, you know, deposits below, and it's also a great way to map the structure and try and understand, you know, where the structural traps and so on will be.
Okay. Well, I mean, there you have it. I mean, Aston Bay is. They just closed a couple of tranches. I think there's another tranche of the financing probably closing over the next few weeks. It's a story I follow. When I first initiated last year, you know, I said then that I expected it to be this year's story, not last year's, and indeed I still believe that. I mean, there'll be, you know, I'm hoping a 3 or 4 or even more 1,000-meter drill program, and this is the kind of story I like, where it's early stage. Yes, there's a lot of evidence pointing to the potential for success, and the target scale is very large, so it's a type of system where a relatively small number of holes makes a huge difference. It's not like drilling a vein. I mean, one of these systems, if you find the right part of the basin and it's been impregnated and the copper's there, you know, you're in the land of big step outs. You don't screw around.
Absolutely.
I mean, these things get big pretty fast if you find one of them. So It's a great target. It's a story you really want to be paying attention to this year. And thanks for coming by to walk us through the geology, Dave.
You're most welcome. Stay tuned.
Okay, we will.